This is Rebel Yell, a Southern Nationalist podcast of the alt-right. I'm your host, Masonius Rufus. Joining me are my co-hosts 𝐀𝐮𝐬𝐿 Ghost and Ryan McMahon. For our 113th episode of Rebel Yell, 𝐀𝐮 and Fulwer speak to Augustus Invictus and a special report on the Fields verdict. Thanks, guys.
Hey, this is 𝐀𝐮𝐬𝐿 Ghost. I'm joined by Fulwer Skipwith and Augustus Invictus. Today is 7 December 2018. James Fields, his verdict was read today with, I believe, guilty, murder 1. And real briefly, we wanted to just do an update for our listeners about what that means, the appeal process for those who don't know anything about that. And that's pretty much where it is. So, Augustus, you've been following the case. I know the other day you did a really good sit-down with 𝐀𝐮𝐬𝐭, Gregory 𝐀𝐮𝐬, I think his first name is, on your channel, The Revolutionary Conservative, which did a really good description of the defense in this case. And like I said, in the last couple hours, we finally had the verdict handed down. And I just wanted an update from the only attorney we knew in our circles about the situation.
Sure. So Greg 𝐀𝐮𝐬 and I talked about the case. To give full credit, actually Greg wrote an article, I think it was for Russia Insider, and he put that SoundCloud discussion in that article. So that was 100% his recording. I put it up at the Revolutionary Conservative so that people could find it through us. But yeah, we sat down and talked for over an hour, I think, about what had happened in the first week of the trial, because Greg went in person and actually watched the trial unfold. However, this week, like you said, there is now a guilty verdict. This week, we've seen the defense witnesses testify, and we've also seen the closing arguments, and now jury has deliberated today and has rendered their verdict. So we do have that update, and it's not good, as obviously he was found guilty of everything he was accused of.
Yeah, and this is just the state Commonwealth of Virginia charges, because he's still facing, I believe it's 30 different federal hate crimes charges at the moment as well, isn't he? Right.
Yeah, and last I checked, he's also facing the death penalty at the federal level.
Wow. Yeah, I did hear that, and I don't know about murder 1 in Virginia, but I believe that is also a death penalty, or carries the death penalty as a maximum.
Yes, but I think they would have had to try it at trial like that. I don't think it's a capital case now. I think what he's looking at is life in prison. But I could be wrong, because the sentencing is Monday. But it just seems to me that if there was a verdict on Friday and sentencing is Monday, it's probably not a capital punishment like execution case. Otherwise, they would have to do a lot of preparation beforehand.
Yeah, I do know that capital murder is treated as a separate crime or a separate degree of murder in Virginia.
Right. And also the sentencing hearing, I mean, obviously it's a completely different procedure, but for a capital case, I mean, that's serious business. And I don't think even this judge, who clearly railroaded Fields the entire time, I don't think even he would try to set the a capital punishment sentencing, right after the verdict. That just, let's hope not anyway.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, and I think most of us were surprised even at the verdict, just because, and again, I'm not an attorney by any stretch of the imagination, but in Virginia, my understanding after reading the law is for an accidental killing to actually be considered murder, it has to be committed while somebody's in the commission of a felony.
So there's felony murder rule, which says, if you're committing a felony, like if you rob a bank and somebody has a heart attack, like that's a murder. But Fields, I mean, he was charged with first-degree murder. He was charged with premeditated murder. And, the deliberation seemed to come down to, was it first-degree murder or was it manslaughter? Because his own defense attorney told the jury, please find him guilty of manslaughter.
Seriously?
He didn't even... Oh, yeah. Yeah, this came out in, it was at NBC, I think, on Twitter, was tweeting live updates.
I think what he said was something like, at worst, find him guilty of the lesser charges, which seemed to me like a strange thing for a defense attorney to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it seems like they should have been saying this kid is 100% innocent. Anybody who was under a threat, under siege by communist terrorists, has a reasonable fear and should be getting the hell out of there when a mob starts attacking him. Like, that should have been the entire case, and it wasn't.
Yeah. Yeah, and I definitely, and as you said, I mean, they essentially with Murder 1, they argued and apparently proved, at least to the jury's standard, of it being premeditation, which I'm still not really sure how they could even argue that, and I'm sure that's something that will play in his appeal, however that goes forward.
Yeah, he's definitely got some grounds for appeals, it seems. One being, the refusal to change venue when Charlottesville is clearly a hostile territory.
Yep.
Another being the judge making comments to the effect of, I don't see how he could have any other intent but to kill. Things like that, just that seem like minor asides. I mean, those are crucial to the defense's case.
Yeah, and especially at least in an appeal, that definitely comes across as prejudicial, and it comes across almost. Again, I'm not an attorney by any stretch of the imagination, but it comes across almost like the sort of sloppiness you would expect out of a judge who isn't, somebody who handles those kind of trials. Which, this is regular circuit court. I assume that this judge has handled murder trials at some point.
Oh, 100%. And I've looked to his webpage, and it does say on there what kind of cases he handles. And this is, like you said, circuit court, this is his bread and butter. So it's not like it was an accident.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Right.
Where will the appeals court, where will the appeal case be heard? Is it going to be like somewhere in nearby? Or does it get kicked up to a state court? Like, will it go to Richmond or something?
I don't know. It's probably, like, I'm unfamiliar with Virginia's appellate procedure, but usually you have districts in the state, right? So like in Florida, we've got the 5th district, and that's in Daytona, and it covers like all of a certain part of central Florida. And they all go to this one region. So I'd imagine Virginia is the same way. Where it's going to get kicked up from Charlottesville. It could be that, the district is seated there in Charlottesville.
Yeah. I know for a fact that the appellate courts in Virginia are it's a separate entity. It's a separate court than the circuit court, though, as you said, frequently they're co-located, with Charlottesville being the biggest city where it's at, because again, Charlottesville's in Appalachian, surrounded by nowhere beyond Charlottesville city limits, so it's a good chance it's still going to be there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to make that case any better.
It doesn't, though. Again, I'm it sort of comes up in the situation with an appeal. If he gets an appeal because of a lack of change of venue, it seems very likely that the appellate court is going to have the common sense to move it at that point, so they don't have to redo it a third time.
Well, I think what it comes down to is, if it is in Charlottesville, you had the same problem you had at trial, where all the attorneys in town are radical leftists, and everybody's part of the same club, and no appellate attorney is going to want to go against the will of that mob. So, no matter what the precedent says, no matter what the law should have been, and no matter how it should have been applied, they're all going to be under the same political pressure that you can't overturn the conviction of James Fields, because there would be riots in the street. America can't handle a verdict like that.
It's important to stress for people who have never been to Charlottesville and aren't aware of quite what the place is like, that these aren't just leftists. This is like the world's resort town for leftists. Yeah. They all have vacation homes there. So it's very rich, very powerful leftists that are in the area.
And extremely ideological. And that brought up to the other question I had is, can you tell us, again, as Virginia in particular, but can you tell us anything about an appeals process? Because I know in most states, you can't just make an appeal on the basis of I'm innocent. You have to demonstrate that something was incorrect with the trial itself. The murder is one of those crimes where sometimes there are automatic appeals. I wasn't sure if you could tell us anything about that. Yeah,
full disclosure, I know nothing about Virginia law. I am only licensed in Florida, Massachusetts, Illinois, New York, and the federal courts. I'm not licensed in Virginia. But like you said, in most places, you get an automatic right to an appeal. All criminal cases you can appeal. It's just the question is, what are the grounds? Now, there are different things you can appeal for, like if something went wrong at the trial, which, I mean, obviously did happen in the case of James Fields. But one thing that a good appellate attorney should bring up if they're not connected with Charlottesville and that community there, one thing they 100% should bring up is ineffective assistance of counsel, which, is pretty clearly demonstrable, I think. The problem is that the appellate court only looks to what's in the record. Again, this is Florida, all the rules down there that I'm talking about, but I assume they're applied pretty similarly in Virginia, but they can only look to the record and what happened at trial, and you can't, appeal on something and say this happened outside of the record, because the appellate court's just going to say if it's not in the transcript, we're not considering it, and that's a huge problem.
Gotcha. That is I think, a very interesting point most people haven't thought about, because there's obviously a difference between the transcript and what was said may not be the same thing in some situations.
Right, because there's a lot on social media and in the news, and there are videos of James Fields being attacked in his car. The mob swarming his car. Mm-hmm. The social media posts about the dude chasing him with a rifle, Dwayne Dixon. All that stuff is totally irrelevant in the appeal, because his defense attorneys did not bring it up, and that's why I think of ineffective assistance of counsel is probably the first thing he should appeal on.
Yep.
Well, that was my next question, was that because I'd heard that when Dwayne Dixon testified, and he was not asked about this particular aspect of his day, and so if the appeal case is like, if the appeal is granted, and could that story then be brought up? Like if there was enough evidence to, if a judge decides to hear the case, could that story come up then?
You mean like if the appeal is granted and it goes back to trial?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Okay. But it would have to be a different defense attorney, because clearly that defense attorney did not have any intention of actually examining Dwayne Dixon. One other example of that is when the prosecution called Marcus Martin, who was famous for being the black dude flying through the air in the famous picture. New York Times paid for his wedding and propagandized it and everything, and he's become a star because of this. Prosecution put him on as like their second witness, and the defense didn't even ask any of these questions about him being in this photograph that won a Pulitzer Prize, about him being propagandized by the New York Times and becoming famous over all this. It didn't even bring it up. Also didn't bring up the fact that he was a convicted felon who had just gotten out of prison a couple years ago. None of this came up on cross-examination. So to think that they were going to do the same for Dwayne Dixon, try to get him to admit that he was chasing James Fields with a rifle, they were never going to do that.
Yeah. Which, as you said, I mean, that's very basic due diligence on the part of an attorney, is something that should be discussed.
100%. Yeah, and I just, one thing that nobody knew until this is that Denise Lunsford was the chief prosecutor of Albemarle County. She was an elected Democrat in charge of the prosecution office. So she only left that position in 2015 because she lost re-election. But to think that you're going to have a former chief prosecutor, by the way, the elected official herself, take a case like this and then go against her own colleagues is just naive.
Yeah, it sounds like a possible redemption narrative.
How did this attorney get assigned to James? Was it a public defender or?
Well, that's actually an interesting question too, because the original person appointed to James Fields' case was taken off the case because of a conflict of interest, because that guy was one of 13 people suing the city of Charlottesville because of the removal of the statue of Robert E. Lee. So they took that guy off because of a conflict of interest and then put this woman on. So that tells you a lot about what they think a conflict of interest is in Charlottesville and what is not.
That right there sounds like enough information in some states to even get a judge impeached.
But that is, I mean, that's incredible. That if anything, that creates an alignment of interests rather than a conflict.
Exactly.
100%. Exactly.
Now, I would like for our listeners and everybody else to step back for a moment and realize this is part of why we discuss ad nauseum about the need for legal defense funds and to build that kind of capacity, because currently the courts are in the hands of the enemy and basic legal due diligence isn't happening for our side. And I know that's something you're working on doing in a number of projects that we probably can't discuss at this moment.
I mean, one we can discuss is the American Legal Defense Fund, which we set up for criminal defense. But the other one, that's still we're still working on the civil side.
Gotcha.
And I'm not in charge of that one, so I'm really not at liberty to. I mean, not that I'm in charge of the LDF, but I can speak for it. But yeah, we set that up because of the Ram case. And a lot of people are asking me, why can't I take Fields' case? And I keep telling them, at the federal level, that is. And I keep telling people it's illegal for me to reach out to James Fields. I am literally barred from talking to him because he is represented by the Public Defender's Office. Yeah. So, if he were to call me, that's one thing. But I can't even tell people, hey, why don't you go talk to him and tell him to call me, because that would be illegal too. So there's only so much you can do as an attorney. You're restricted by a lot of rules people don't know about.
Yeah, and you and I have discussed this in past episodes and whatnot, and that's part of why you've made this effort to fly all over God's creation to engage with guys from RAM and whatnot when they've come down on federal charges, is for that reason. Somebody can end up being charged with a crime, and as soon as they get a public defender who's probably going to tell them to take whatever plea is put in front of them, no matter how bad it is, that they're basically in a black hole where you or anybody else as an attorney can't reach out and tell them to get better counsel.
Right, exactly. And unless they reach out to counsel themselves, what are they going to do? In a lot of criminal cases, before I went on sabbatical and all this happened, I used to do, drug trafficking and robberies and murder and all that, crazy stuff. And it was always the families that would reach out to us and hire us. The guys who are in jail, they're not on the internet. They're not searching around for attorneys in town. It's near impossible for them to reach out and find competent counsel, especially if they've already got a public defender that they're depending on. So it's a bleak situation for those guys, especially at the federal level.
Yeah, which I think we want to stress at so many different levels. If somebody from our side is charged, recommend that they reach out to a competent attorney they know for that reason. The public defenders, as they've been demonstrated, are generally not operating in the best interest of their client.
Right, especially in a case like this. Especially in, the Ram case, James Fields' case, the Proud Boys case, because these are political persecutions. And all of these people that work for the government, well, not all of them. I've known a few conservatives that work for the PD's office or the prosecutor. My dad used to be a public defender. Mm-hmm. So there are conservatives in these places, but they're very few and far between. And the further we get along this whatever's going on in America, the fewer they're becoming.
Yeah, on that tangent as well, an actual defense requires active effort on the part of a legal counsel's office that even if a public defender intends to, they don't necessarily have the resources. Just as an outsider, I know things like investigators, defense attorneys frequently hire, good defense attorneys hire investigators to go collect evidence to rebut evidence when it's put in court. But, an attorney operating pro bono doesn't do that because they simply don't have the funds to do that.
Right. Exactly. And that's one of the biggest obstacles we're facing in these present cases, is that the federal public defender's office and the court-appointed attorneys, they may or may not be communists. Who knows? But the fact is, they have the money because the federal government pays all their fees. So if they have an investigator, the federal government is paying for that. And nobody can afford a criminal defense case at the federal level. It is just so prohibitively expensive to hire private counsel. And that's the entire reason we started the defense fund, because there's no way for an individual to pay for that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. In a reasonable, one of the biggest off the back of the napkin accounting measures I point out is that it costs about $50 an hour minimum to hire an investigator to do basic level surveillance and field research. And that is the kind of money you blow through very quickly in any kind of felony defense. Which again,
Well, see,
many of our guys, getting good defense attorneys frequently don't have the resources to even hire that kind of basic resource. And I cut you off for a while.
Yeah, I was going to say, just a case that I recently heard about with numbers to give you an indication of how expensive it is. There was a woman recently who, I mean, she is a lawyer for like men's interests or something like that, and she was covering. And this is all pre-trial. Like it ended up no charges, no trial happened or anything like that. But she was dealing with some false accusations against a dude, and she ended up billing $200 an hour for like 50 some odd hours of work, and it ended up costing this guy $44,000 because somebody just like threw some false accusations at him.
Yeah,
that sounds about right.
Yeah, and I know that a couple of people in our circles whose name I won't mention right now have pointed out that the federal prosecutor's office, as well as the local prosecutor in Charlottesville, is essentially acting almost like a civil suit or a civil law firm, in the sense that they're essentially using criminal charges to bleed the other side financially before actually engaging them.
Right. Yeah, because I mean, a case like this, like the Ram case, is probably $50,000 a pop. That adds up, 8 people, that's almost $500,000, especially when you're talking about investigatory fees and all that stuff. Yeah. You're not even talking about court costs. You're talking about just attorney's fees is almost $500,000. Yeah. And the federal government knows that because they have unlimited resources. They know that the right wing cannot afford to defend stuff like that. So that's why this is so important.
Yeah, and very much so. And I stress this ad nauseum. And again, I'm not an attorney, but even if an attorney chooses to do things, quote, for free, things like traveling to and from where the clients are, investigators, like we said, basic office supplies, all those things cost money. So even if an attorney isn't taking home a paycheck, all those things cost money. And the salary of the attorney may be the least expensive thing that he's charging for.
Right. And that's also, assuming it's a trial level case. Somebody just asked me before we went on air. I was talking to somebody not connected with y'all at all, but she was asking me about an appellate case because this guy was found guilty of, I guess, assaulting someone at the Silent Sam statue. Some Antifa, did something and the guy hit him. So they're asking me, can we just, instead of funding this case, can we find an appellate attorney who's going to do this for free, do it a pro bono? And possibly, but, the reason that trial level attorneys do cases for free is that they get the publicity from it. And that, will increase their income in the future. To do an appellate case that's not sexy at all and that's not covered by the media, you're going to be really hard pressed to find an attorney who's just going to willy-nilly do a case pro bono for the principle of the thing.
Yeah, even if the attorney is rich and has the best of intentions, this is going to eat up an enormous amount of their time, which keeps them from making other money. So it's
because appellate practice is very labor intensive. It's all paperwork. There's no glory in it, unless you're going to the U.S. Supreme Court or something. So it's a different ball game. So if you don't win the trial level, it's all uphill from there.
Yeah. And again, I say these things as somebody who's not an attorney, but the reason I harp on this and sound absolutely like somebody advocating for legal defense on our side is the fact that, as you've said before, politics is war by other means. And unfortunately, our side is not coming to the game, as it were, with that mentality. And it's hurt us today. It's going to hurt us worse in the future if we don't change the mentality.
Yeah, I saw someone, commenting on what happened with Fields, and they said on the Twitter machine something like he doesn't need someone who's an alt-right lawyer. He needs a competent criminal attorney. And, you would like to think that's true because a competent criminal attorney would, zealously defend his client. That's your duty as a criminal defense attorney. But the reality of this world is that they have a reputation that will suffer if they actually win a case like James Field's case. So it's not about competence, it's about political pressure. And that's why at this point we don't need impartial, zealous defenders. We need partisan guerrilla fighters.
Yeah.
We need whether or not you think he needs an alt-right attorney, any attorney that takes him de facto becomes an alt-right attorney.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Which is how you got in this game to begin with the American Front.
Yeah, exactly. When I took the American Front case in 2012, I I was a centrist libertarian.
Yeah.
And from that day forward, I became a neo-Nazi white supremacist terrorist. And every attorney in America is on notice. If you do what Invictus did, that's going to be you. Yeah.
Yeah. And unfortunately, we need people to do what you've done because in all cases, if, I say this is in the most, traditional centrist libertarian possible. It's like we need to defend our guys because it's bad for everybody in this country in terms of case precedent. But in terms of a partisan for our side, we, as I said, we need to come to this game as if understanding that the law is war and that our survival is at stake. And that's part of what I'm harping on incessantly on our side.
100%. I could not agree with that more, man.
I know that. Is there anything else directly related to the Field case that you would want to, Field's case that you would like to discuss right now that, or you haven't seen mentioned that is important?
I mean, I guess it's important to clue everybody into the fact that he, no matter how this appeal goes, he's still got other issues going on because U.S. Attorney Tim Cullen has charged him with those 30 hate crimes charges that are going to lead to the death penalty. Yeah. So he could win the appeal. It is possible. He could win the appeal, get the his sentence vacated, and go back to trial and win. That's possible. But even if that happens, best case scenario, he walks on this state murder charge, and in the long run, he's still facing the federal trial. And that's what, we'd really like to help him with, but we, unless he reaches out to me, we can't, and we can't even give him a different attorney because we can't talk to him. So he's kind of just in limbo right now, at the mercy of the system, which is a terrible place to be.
Yeah, which, as we've seen today, the system is not an impartial defender of individual liberty.
No, and they can't tolerate someone like James Fields going free.
Yes.
Because it would destroy the entire narrative. You can let someone like O.J. Simpson go free, who was clearly guilty, because it doesn't wreck anything.
Yeah.
But if you let James Fields go free, it's going to say, these communists attacked him, and they were the aggressors, and that the media cannot have.
Yeah.
The entire system cannot have that.
Yeah. Fuller, you have anything directly related just to the Fields case itself that needs to be brought up?
The Dixon question was the only one that I had. That was the only situation that I wanted to clear up.
Gotcha.
Because that's the thing that I've seen people complain about the most is they've been really angry that Dixon wasn't asked about chasing Fields with a gun.
Yeah, which is a felony in any other circumstance if the attorney actually or the prosecutor actually did their job.
Yeah, it makes you think that this former prosecutor who was in charge of Fields' defense called Dixon in order to get him to say, no, I wasn't chasing him with a rifle, so that it would kill what they're calling an alt-right conspiracy. He got up there and he said under oath he didn't do it. Case closed. So let's convict James Fields now.
Yeah, and this is one of those cases where, it may not be a conspiracy, but if it were, it was exactly how it would look. Wow. So
it's harder to think. It's harder to conjure a more corrupt-looking trial than what has just happened.
Yeah, exactly, right?
And just the instance of the defense attorney getting taken off because he was suing the city over the monument removal, and then they appoint a former prosecutor, just that alone makes this look like one of the most nefarious trials I've ever seen.
Yeah. That on so many levels, and it again, as an outsider, it almost seems to undermine her credibility as an attorney because of the fact part of why former prosecutors are popular as defense attorneys is they generally go out and know how to win, and that's the opposite of what she just did. Well, another reason you hire former prosecutors is people have this notion that they still have friends in the office so they can get a better deal for them. In this case, obviously, number one, there was no deal at all for James Fields. They were trying to crucify him. And number two, it would have been a huge miscalculation considering the fact that this woman was not just a prosecutor. She was chief prosecutor. She doesn't just have friends in that office. I mean, that is her life. She is a prosecutor. Yeah.
So to think she's going to step on all their toes and offend everybody and throw her entire reputation out as a prosecutor to let this neo-Nazi terrorist go, that's just naive.
Yeah.
And then there was, like, I remember when during the Kavanaugh confirmation, there was a lot of criticism coming from other lawyers that the attorney representing Kavanaugh was a former prosecutor and not someone who specialized in this kind of defense. It's important to emphasize how specialized in some cases the practice of law is at the highest levels. Like,
yeah,
these people are really good at doing one or two things.
Yeah, I mean, there's a difference between defending a DUI case and defending a murder trial. If I were, because my background is in criminal defense, I've done business formations. I've done civil work before, contracts and things like that. But if you ask me to go to a major trial for like Coca-Cola against Pepsi Cola, I would be totally unqualified for something like that. And likewise, if I were asked to defend a Supreme Court justice in a case where he's being confirmed for the appointment there, that's totally out of my wheelhouse. So you've really got to pick your attorney carefully.
Yeah, and one of the things I do remember, because I listened to your weekly live stream, as you said in the past in Florida, you can't ever defend a murder as a first case. You have to either be a second chair or I think you said you had to be a second chair on a murder case before you're even allowed to defend somebody of murder in the state of Florida.
Well, it's not necessarily murder, but a capital trial, yes.
Gotcha. Okay.
So if it's a death penalty murder trial, yes. And actually, that's what happened in the Casey Anthony case, is that Jeff Ashton, who was the prosecutor, didn't want that defense attorney on the case. Jose Baez was Casey Anthony's attorney. He wanted him kicked off, so then he sought the death penalty to get him kicked off, and it backfired because Baez brought in Cheney Mason, who's one of the most famous attorneys in Central Florida. So it's just a weird play, but if you aren't death penalty qualified, you can't touch those cases. You got to bring in a second person, but you can take a murder trial if it's not death penalty.
Interesting.
Florida rules, man. It's that's why nobody has reciprocity with Florida, because all the rules are a lot different than other states.
Yeah, well, in this case, that rule may have actually saved James Fields today if we had it, so it's unfortunate. Those were the biggest things I had. In terms of general legal defense or anything else, I know you said you were looking up how to get a hold of James Fields because we had people who wanted to mail him letters or whatnot. What else would you
right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so you would ask me how. All right, so first of all, there's the American Legal Defense Fund for funding the cases, the project that we're working on, and I can give you the address for that later. But
please,
for anybody trying to mail James Fields or to put money on his canteen, you just go to Google and you type in Albemarle County Jail, and when you get here, it will be the page titled Regional Jail, and it'll say Albemarle County, Virginia at the top, and on the left-hand side, you're going to see Inmate Canteen Fund in that green bar. So when you find that has the directions on how to put money on his fund, and it will also have instructions here on how to send mail to an inmate. So last I heard, he's still there because that's where the federal holding is in Charlottesville, so I don't think he's going anywhere.
Roger. That's all I had. So like I said, thanks for coming on, Augustus, on short notice, and I know you've been busy with all kinds of meetings today, so we definitely appreciate it, and hopefully you open some eyes in terms of the enormity of what our side is confronting at the moment.
I hope so, man, because it seems like everybody's just kind of putting their head in the sand and hoping this all passes over, and I'm trying to make the point here that James Fields and 𝐕𝐚, these guys are just the beginning. Like, if anything, even if these are the only cases that Colin's office is going to prosecute this year and next year, it's still going to set the precedent for the next witch hunt. And then they're just going to be able to point to these cases and say, Judge, we've already been through this. These people are already an outlaw class. We don't even need to go to trial on this.
Yeah, and on so many issues. in the fact that our side, by not organizing a proper defense, is demonstrating to the opposition that this is a means to come after us because we're not going to do anything to protect our side at all.
Yeah, I mean, if they, see that you're trying to set up a legal defense fund and it fails, what does that signal to the federal government? It says these fucking guys can't get their shit together enough to pay for private attorneys for their own people.
Yeah.
Well, let's railroad them. Railroad them all because they can't even stand up to it.
Exactly. And that's what I had. Thanks again for the short notice, man. And hopefully we can get this out fairly soon. Thanks again, bro.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Oh, I'm a good old rebel. Now that's just what I am. For this fair land of freedom, I do not care a damn. I'm glad I fought against it. I only wish we'd won. And I don't want no pardon for anything I've done. I hates the Constitution, this great republic too. I hates the Freedmen's Bureau in uniforms of blue. I hates the nasty eagle with all his brags and fuss. The lying, thieving Yankees, I hate some worse and less. I hates the Yankee nation and everything they do. I hates the Declaration of Independence too. I hates the glorious Union, 'tis dripping with our blood. I hates their striped banner, I fit it all I could. Followed old Mass Robert for 4 years near about. Got wounded in 3 places and starved at Pint Lookout. I caught the rheumatism camping in the snow, but I killed a chains of Yankees, I'd like to kill some more. $300,000 Yankees are stiff in southern dust. We got 300,000 before they conquered us. They died of southern fever, southern steel and shot. I wish there was 3 million instead of what we got. Now I can't take up my musket and fight 'em now no more, but I ain't gonna love 'em, that is certain sure. And I don't want no pardon for what I was and am. I won't be reconstructed, and I don't care a damn. Oh, I'm a good old rebel, now that's just what I am. Oh, I'm a good old rebel, now that's just what I am.
Crush the damn urbanite.